He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
My friend Chris and I say that to each other as early as we wake up. Pretty much every day on Easter. We've been friends for 9 years now. We started saying, we switched it to he is instead of he has about 3 or 4 years ago. And we were having this talk, and just based on life circumstances and everything, it was becoming rather pedestrian to be a believer, and it was like this, I study, I go to church, for me it was worship teams and all that good stuff. And then when Easter came around, my friend Chris went to Bible school, and so he had sort of a more theological point of view, and he said, look, Easter is something that the Christians, just like Christmas and everything like that, the Christians took an already existing holiday and kind of assimilated it. And that's kind of what we do. That's what Paul did when he went into Rome. And he was looking around trying to relate to these Romans who had 1 million gods, and found a statue of a god and said, I want to tell you about this God. It says unknown God. I want to tell you about this God that you don't know. And so that's kind of that's been a tradition of believers since then, is assimilate different things and go, oh yeah, we're going to remember the day that Jesus rose again. And Chris said, I can't bury that in my mind. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start saying he is risen, because this is ours now. This is our holiday. This is a holiday for everyone, for every believer in the world, to remember that Jesus not only has risen, not something that we historically remember, which is accurate. He did rise from the dead, but he is risen, and I am risen with him. Amen.
Amen.
That's huge. That's cool. So he and I said that to each other this morning. So today's reading is Luke 22, starting right at the beginning. Luke 22. I don't know who you are, those who gave me this Bible with bigger print, but bless you. I can stand back here and read. Wow. This is great. Thank you so much. In my Bible, the heading is Judas agrees to betray Jesus. Now, I'm only going to go, there's so many ways to go with this on Easter Sunday morning. There's so many pastors throughout the United States, not including me, because I am not a pastor and do not profess to be. I'm just simply a teacher who has my own personal walk with Christ, and so that's all I teach you from. It's not from a college understanding or anything like that, but there are a lot of pastors throughout the United States today who are going through different aspects of this story. And throughout my own Bible study over the past month, I've looked at it in several various lights, and it kind of confused me a little bit getting toward today. I didn't have a good idea of what I was going to say until probably Tuesday morning. And until I was reading over the story again for about the umpteenth time, and finally went, wow, there's an angle that I've never looked at before, and that would be interesting. So, to set you up, I'll kind of go through things starting at Judas agreeing to betray Jesus. We'll go a little bit through the Last Supper, and when the disciples agree to, or the disciples are trying to stay awake in the garden to pray with Jesus. Now, the things that going on across our world with the persecution of Christians kind of remind us that not only was Jesus explaining to his disciples what was happening, and not only was he going through everything that had been said before about him, he was now, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your view of the whole situation, the disciples were going to have to die for their faith. And I believe they all perished almost to a man in various ways throughout history in Acts of the Apostles. So he was showing them how to die. He showed them how to live, and now he is showing them basically how to die. And that death is not the end. Death is not a tragic deal, but death is a proclamation of their faith, and it was a proclamation of their faith. If you never have, I would encourage you, also, there's another book you could read. It's called Voice of the Martyrs by D.C. Talk. And there's two, I think volume 1, volume 2. I could not make it through volume 2. They're very deep, very heavy books. Volume 1 deals with the persecution of Christians in Asian communities. And Asian communities, including, I believe they include India, are very focused on a state-centered religion. Now, the People's Republic of China, I don't believe, acknowledges one religion, but there are various subdermal layers of policing that will go into making sure that Christianity does not get shared throughout that country. There was a guy that, Dr. G.V. Matai, that came to Christian over and over again from the country of India, and he said, now there is a law on the books in India saying that an Indian national can proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ, but that a foreigner, so someone like you and I, cannot go to that country and preach. We can't go as a missionary. We cannot label ourselves as that. In fact, one of the guys that was trying to witness with him would have applied over and over and over again for a work visa so that he could stay in India and witness with Dr. Matai. And India kept denying him. He would put missionary, denied, pastor, denied. Then he just put believer, denied. They looked at his country, they saw believer, and they went, nope, and they denied him. He could not stay in the country. He could come for a little while, but he couldn't stay. Finally, he thought a little bit about who Jesus was when he was alive and with his disciples on earth, and he thought, he wrote teacher. It was accepted. Kind of interesting. So he was able to witness with Dr. Matai, but the persecution of Christians is all throughout that book, in very graphic detail. It took me a long time to get through it. I believe it is a good study, though, so that you kind of know, like we talked about here in the United States, for the most part, we're pretty sheltered from physical harm. Now, emotional and verbal abuse is kind of the way it goes in the United States, as people kind of turn their eyes away from God and toward other things, and have started to lash out against believers for different reasons. But we won't go into that today. We're just talking about, starting with...
it's through the mental health care system that they persecute us.
Yes, that's lately now what's going on. So we've started in Luke 22, verse 1. Judas agrees to betray Jesus. Now we're going to be looking at Judas, and some of you probably looked at this and went, why Judas, Jeff? Why? I'll get to that. It's pretty good. Now the festival of unleavened bread, called the Passover, was approaching. And the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of Jesus, for they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. And Judas went to the chief priests and officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. They were delighted and agreed to give him money. He consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when no crowd was present. Now, if you know the actual story, there will be a crowd present when this occurs. But I looked up kind of, in other Gospels, it gives the actual price, 30 pieces of silver. Now, I did a little bit of research into that and went, why 30 pieces of silver? I didn't really know the significance. If you already know it, I'm sorry, I didn't know it. And so I had to look it up. And Judas betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, which is in a couple places actually in the Bible. 30 pieces of silver is mentioned. We don't really know how well the silver was created, so in today's market value, it could be anywhere from $90 to $5,000. So that really doesn't bear significance for us. But in Zechariah, it is the cost of in Zechariah, it is listed as the wage of a good shepherd. Now, there are varying degrees of shepherdom. There's the, not so great shepherd, which, you don't want to bring your sheep to because that's a bad idea. And then it goes I teach 6th grade. And then it goes all the way up to good shepherd, which is a guy that, now a good shepherd is the guy that would leave his 99 sheep to go find one, if you will. It's the good shepherd that will find appropriate pasture, that if you want your sheep well taken care of, you spend that 30 pieces of silver. That is the daily wage of a good shepherd. Isn't that ironic that Jesus is called the good shepherd? There is another, in Exodus, the cost of a slave is 30 pieces of silver. Now, it's listed in a couple places. In one of them, there's a law that specifies that if a slave is killed, you are to pay 30 pieces of silver to the owner, and then if it was done by a bull, you're supposed to kill the bull. That doesn't make any sense to us for this purpose, so I don't know why I said that. The other reason it is listed is if you want to buy a slave and give them their freedom, the running rate is 30 pieces of silver, a slave's ransom. Isn't that interesting? So that's Judas being paid 30 pieces of silver. Now, I call this scene in the Bible the meal and the betrayer. We've already set the scene with the betrayer. We know exactly who he is. Let's go to the meal, the Last Supper, verse 7. The first brunch, if you will, of Easter. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go make preparations for us to eat the Passover." Where do you want us to prepare? Where do you want us to prepare for it? They asked. He replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there.'" Now, this is a lot like, it really echoes the story that we talked about last week, if you were here. If you weren't here last week, we talked about, on Palm Sunday, Jesus riding into Jerusalem, and he rides in on a donkey, and this kind of thing happens. The disciples are a roaming kind of band without really a home to call their own, no place to rest their head, so Jesus has to just come up with these little things as he goes, and he says, "Hey, there's going to be a guy outside the town, find him, he's got himself a donkey, ask for the donkey, say the Lord needs it, he's going to give it to you." In this case, it was follow a man who has water, but that's not even the man who owns the house, as far as we know. Follow this man who has some water, and he will take you to a house. Look at the guy that owns the house and say, "Hey, the teacher," and it's capital T, "the teacher needs the upper room where he can eat the Passover." So that's how it goes. They left and found things, verse 13, just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat of it again until I find fulfillment in the kingdom of God." After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, you will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." Then he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. The Son of Man will go as it has been decreed, but woe to that man who betrays him." They began to question among themselves which of them it might be that would do all of this. So we see a scene set apart, of course, for, we usually look at this during communion times, but I want to zero in again before a dispute arises among them. According to Luke, this is when the disciples decide to dispute amongst them who will be called the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. But right before that, he says in verse 21, "But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. The Son of Man will go as it has been decreed, but woe to that man who betrays him." And they began to question, if he's here, who is he? Now, as a kid, I actually asked the question of a Sunday school teacher that I had. I think it was in 4th grade. And, of course, we had learned over and over and over again. Now, there's a whole bunch of places in the Bible, and I'll go into them, where it is absolutely everyone who is to be saved. I mean, first it was to the Jews. Jesus came to the Jews, and then he came to the rest of us and said, "Do these things. All you have to do is surrender your sin to me, place your faith in my blood, and you will be saved forever. You will live forever in eternity." And we know that as an absolute fact. There is no way around it. There's nothing, of course, you know this, there's nothing that you can do to buy this. There's nothing that you can do to completely earn this. Nothing at all is possible for us humans to get to where we need to be without Jesus and without his death. So I asked my Sunday school teacher, probably on an Easter Sunday, he was talking to us about this story, and I said, hold up. We had just finished reading about Judas. Now, we know that Judas, after this, Jesus, of course, goes through all of what he needs to do. And Judas, right after this, goes up to the religious leaders, and he throws the money at them and says, I've made a terrible mistake. You need to do something about this. But they, of course, already have what they want. They, of course, already have Jesus. So they said, oh, that's your problem. That's your problem. You made the bad decision. We don't want your money back. That's your money now. So he throws it at them, and he goes out, and he hangs himself. But I want to dwell on the question that I asked when I was in 4th grade. I asked my Sunday school teacher, so could Judas have been saved? If it's true that all I have to do is put my faith in Jesus Christ and I will be saved, and he'll forgive me of everything I've ever done and ever will do in my life, could Judas have been saved? Why didn't he decide to be saved? And I think that my Sunday school teacher meant well. I don't really know all the words that he said, but I know that it started with, well, Geoff, hold on now. You're talking about regular sin. You're talking about regular sin you're being forgiven of and that kind of thing. This guy betrayed Jesus. You can't, I don't know. You can't come, this guy did the one sin. We were going, there is no such thing as the one sin, is there? But this is what my Sunday school teacher said to me. And I thought, that really bugged me. I went home, I thought about that some more, I read all those verses, and I have a few of them. In Acts 16:31, it says, believe in the Lord and you will be saved, you and your family. In Luke 39, it talks about the two criminals, and I'll go there in a little bit. But there's two criminals hanging on the cross. One of them is hurling insults at Jesus, which is not necessarily what you want to do with your last minutes on earth, because now you're forever remembered as that guy, and I'm sorry, but you're not going to a really fun place after that. So I don't know what the guy was thinking. And his buddy, we don't know if it was buddy, but I call him his buddy, the guy opposite of Jesus says, hey, hold on now. This guy is the Son of God. What are you doing? And he asks for forgiveness. And Jesus says, truly I tell you, today you will be with me where? In paradise. In paradise. He did not have to live a life with Jesus. He did not have to do the right things throughout his life. He did not have to somehow make up for all the things. He didn't have to do 30 Hail Marys. And all of a sudden, he is being welcomed into the kingdom forever. And I thought to myself, all these things are pointing to, yes, wouldn't it have been a great story if Judas had asked for forgiveness and had been saved? I'm reading a book right now. Big surprise. I'm reading a book right now. Sometimes I think my messages are like a book club. It's called The Great Divorce. And I got this for $10 at Barnes & Noble, The Great Divorce. Now, the title is misleading, and we had friends come over just a little while ago, and they looked at us and were like, what are you reading there, Geoff? And I went, hold on. C.S. Lewis would not talk about divorce in this way. What it means is to break apart. And they're, okay. C.S. Lewis wrote this book, I think, to a Christian that was trying to wrestle with this fact between the two places that our soul can go, because we know there's only two places. And the book starts, there is actually a bus going from hell to heaven, starting in hell and going toward heaven. And there's a bunch of people on this bus. And so apparently this bus comes out of the sky, it's glowing and everything like that. The bus driver is holding his hand over his mouth because he can't hardly breathe the noxious fumes that are going on. All these people get on the bus. It's told by the point of view of the main character, who is he just wants to see what the other place is like. He doesn't know why he got to this place, but he wants to see what that place is like. So he gets on the bus, and all the people on the bus are fighting the entire way. They're all going like, oh, I can't believe that I'm on the same bus as you, and they're just quarreling the entire way. And one of them comes over to him, It says a very profound thing that will define the rest of the book. This guy comes and sits next to him and says, man, I don't know why all these people are on this bus. They don't want to leave. And he's like, what are you talking about? They don't want to leave hell? And he says, no, they really don't want to leave. They're happy there. They're very happy. And hell is told as it is the version of hell that is right now, which is Hades, which is before the beast, which is Satan, gets thrown into the pit, which is kind of a holding tank right now for everyone that is going to go later to eternal punishment. And everybody there knows that they want to get to heaven because there's a darkness coming. Night is coming. It's perpetually dusk in Hades right now, but a darkness is going to descend over the land. No one really knows what it is, but they know they don't want to be there when it happens. So they get to heaven, and the door is open, everybody runs out and stuff, and then they realize two things. First of all, they're ghosts. So they're walking around. First of all, it's beautiful. It's a sunny day. They're out in nature. There's meadows and streams and deep forest, and it seems to go on for miles. They can't even see the end of it. And there's big mountains in the distance with clouds, and there's sun all around. It's so warm, and they're kind of shedding all these coats that they've been wearing, going like, oh, it's so nice here and everything. And then they notice a couple things. They're ghosts. They're almost see-through. They can hardly see themselves. And then they also notice that one of them goes and finds a flower on the ground. He decides to go down and pick it. He learns later that the flower actually weighs like a ton, and he can't pick the flower. And it bugs him, and he starts straining at the flower and gets angry and tries to pull the flower, and it won't come out. It won't come out of the ground. And then in the distance, they see these glowing figures. And they're walking toward them. They seem to be very happy. They're talking to each other. They're singing to each other. In the book, this is how it happens. They kind of come toward him. And the main character stands there just in awe of these glowing figures. And then he realizes those are men just like me. But they're not see-through. So one of them comes up to, the main character views it as his friend. He comes up to his friend. And his friend does not seem pleased to see him. His friend is one of the see-through beings that has come from hell, and he doesn't seem happy to see his glowing counterpart. He says, what about poor James, eh? You look pretty pleased with yourself, but what I say is, what about poor James? What happened to him? And the main character doesn't know what's going on. He leans in closer, and in the ensuing conversation, he comes to find out that they're talking about a man that the glowing figure, the glowing friend, has killed. The glowing friend himself is a murderer. And how could a murderer end up here? His ghost friend keeps asking about James. The glowing friend says, he is here, said the other. You will meet him soon if you stay. But you murdered him. Of course I did. But you know, it's all right now. All right? Is it? All right for you, you mean, but what about the poor chap himself laying cold and dead? But he isn't. I have told you, you will meet him soon. He sends you his love. What I'd like to understand, said the ghost, is what you're here for, as pleased as punch. A bloody murderer while I've been walking the streets down there and living in a place like a pigsty all these years. That is a little hard to understand at first, said the other. But it is all over now. You'll be pleased about it presently. Till then, there is no need to bother about it. And they go back and forth, the first two friends, and it's really hard to understand for the man that's been living down there for the last few years, why his friend ended up in heaven of all places. So we meet two other friends. He keeps walking and he sees another conversation, and these are two college professors, two philosophy professors. And one of them is trying to convince the other one that he got it all wrong. He comes up to him at first and he says, don't you understand now that you've been living down there and I've been up here, that we had it all wrong the entire time? Before I died, I committed my life to Christ, and here I am, I'm alive. Come with me. You get to come with me now. And the other one says, oh, excuse me, I'm in the wrong place. Completely wrecked the momentum at that moment. the one from down there says, well, you keep referring to our place as that place. What do you guys call it anything? And he says, we call it hell. There's no need to be profane, my dear boy. I may not be very orthodox in your sense of the word, but I do feel that these matters ought to be discussed simply and seriously and reverently. His friend says, discuss hell reverently? I mean what I said. You have been in hell. Although, if you don't go back, you may call it purgatory. Go on, my dear boy, go on. That is so much like you. No doubt you'll tell me why, in your view, I was sent there. No doubt you'll tell me all about your God and how I need to follow him. He doesn't understand what's really in front of his face. And I've been reading this book, and it's kind of interesting as they go along. At one point, they come to a stream, and there are golden apples growing from a tree by this stream. And the main character sees a ghost from down there, and he is trying to take one of the golden apples with him. And he tries to lift it. He tries to put it in a bag that he's carrying. It's like lifting 2 bowling balls, and he's just like dragging it along the ground. And finally, he drags it over to the bus, and there's this emanating voice, this booming voice that comes from the sky. And all the voice says is, "You fool! If you took that thing with you, what would you do with it? Why not stay here, where you can learn to eat these golden apples and live forever?" Really interesting read, isn't it? But I want to go to Luke 39, if you would. Luke 39, where Jesus is talking to the 2 thieves on the cross. And if you're here today and you've been thinking about this question and kind of going, well, it's a hard one to reconcile. Luke 39 existed. I just did you wrong.
Verse.
Oh.
Verse 39.
23, verse 39. Jeez, I thought I was all set up. Here we are. If you were here thinking to yourself, Judas could have been saved, Jeff, but, He's kind of irreconcilable. He's one of those characters that is meant to be in there, and he's meant to serve that purpose, and he was meant to do all the things he was supposed to do. Wouldn't it have been a cool story if Judas had been saved? If he actually went, now that was the Son of God, and he had been saved. Now, maybe there is a Judas in your life, or maybe you are someone that has been quantifying everybody's thoughts and deeds and actions and everything, and going like, well, if you want to come to God, you got to clean up this, you got to clean up that. And maybe you were that person and went, if I want to come to God, I have to do this and that and the other thing, and I have to get this part of my life right. You know what? If you're going to come to church and you're going to come to my brunch on Easter Sunday, you're going to eat my deviled eggs, kind of an ironic name for an egg. You're going to have to not do the things that you usually do when you're over here. You're going to have to not use as many F-bombs over at my house. I mean, come on, it's Easter, my friend. If you're in that mindset, you're me. I do that a lot to people at work, people that are friends of mine, and I kind of do that to write them off. And I've been noticing throughout this week, I have written a couple people off that I work with. And one of them is a Mormon, and then one of them just is not a believer, is an atheist, would love to stay an atheist, and would love to not hear me talk about this kind of thing anymore. And I can't write those kind of people off, because I know that one little decision could change them forever. He said that was 23, verse 39. Someone find it for me? That's awesome. There we go. Thank you so much. One of the criminals who hung there hurling insults at him. Are you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God? He said. Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Now it's about noon. Darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. Now I'm going to stop there. I'm going to kind of proceed with caution through this because I have another quote for you. But the veil of the temple is torn in half. darkness crosses the land, rocks break, there's thunder, there's earthquakes. It is a violent situation. I encourage you to read it reverently, just because it's a powerful bit of scripture when it goes through these things. But I have a quote today from a man named Philip Brooks. And he was a 19th century preacher in the Midwest. And he said this. He said, "The great Easter truth is actually not that we are to live newly after death. That is not the greatest thing." I stopped there as soon as I read this the first time and said, "How dare you say that?" But let me continue. "But the greatest truth is that we are to be new here and now by the power of the resurrection. We may live nobly now because we will live forever." If you believe that when you put your faith in Jesus Christ, you will be saved, you and your family, you believe that verse, you believe that the criminal that was on the cross is going to be in heaven again, then you also believe that you are an eternal being. And if you believe that you are an eternal being, you believe that our forever has already begun. Philip Brooks was a pastor that wanted to defy the norms of his time. In his time, people were looking down on non-believers and kind of saying, "No, what's wrong with you? Like, gosh, get your stuff together before Easter." And they were trying to look down on other people that were not of the same faith persuasion, and to do that kind of thing, like create those walls that they had to surmount to get back to God. And Philip Brooks was saying, hey, if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, you put your faith in him, his history would actually confirm through the Bible that we are living in forever right now. And doesn't that change things? You could change someone right now into a forever being. You could make their forever start right now. And today, if that's you, and if you're looking for eternal life in Jesus Christ, you could start right now. Forever starts right when you say, "I will." That's when it all begins. And for those of you that are believers, you are a forever being. You will live forever. We're just passing from one phase into another when we die. So I say again, he is risen.
Yes, risen.
Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for what you did for us on the cross. I thank you for all the things that you went through. And I thank you for the testimony of the disciples that came right after you in Acts of the Apostles, God. I thank you that their deaths were not in vain, that all that they suffered and died for created the modern Christian movement that we are in today. Amen.